Welcome to the IDP After Show Week 6 preview episode. I'm your host, Jeff Pomazal. We just wrapped up Week 5, which meant we were dealing with our first round of buys as well as traversing some injuries, and we get more of the same here in Week 6. Joining me this week to share some insight on some players that were higher on the consensus as well as some were lower on is none other than Dynasty Tripp from Footballguys. Tripp and I are breaking down a total of 14 players in this episode to help you navigate the fantasy football landscape from an IDP perspective. If that sounds like something you and your teams could use, sit back, listen in, and let's get after it on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
All right, let's jump right into these players that we have for Week 6 Tripp. Who's a defensive lineman that you like more than most heading into this week?
Well, I'm particularly interested this week in Carl Granderson, and I'm guessing that folks might be a little sour on him after getting no sacks last week, but if they happen to find any highlights, they might have noticed that Carl Granderson did get a sack. It was just erased by a fictitious roughing the passer call, which was the softest one you'll see. So poor Carl Granderson lost a consecutive game streak of sacks. Granderson is tied for the league lead among edge defenders with 19 solo tackles with Byron Young of the Rams. He would be tied with Young in second place for sacks at 5.5 if he'd been given credit for that sack of Jackson Dart last week. He's playing the New England Patriots this week. The Saints draw the Patriots. And now the Saints pass rushers haven't been great as a team in generating pressure, but when they have been successful, they've done it by manufacturing pressure through stunts. And the Saints, or the Patriots, their offensive line is a bit more susceptible, given the turnover and changing coaches and such, than the typical NFL line to stunts. And so I like not only Granderson, but the Saints to generate some pressure with some stunts, and that Granderson to be able to deliver and stay near the top of the edge defender standings on the fantasy board.
Yeah, it's been amazing what Granderson has been able to do this season, considering he's really the only edge player they really have, with Chase Young being kind of out, not being able to play yet this season. You know, Cameron Jordan is on clearly the back nine of his career. So, it's been amazing to see Granderson kind of have this revelation season for him to kind of be successful as he has. So I know that he's been a hot player on waivers, and it's been kind of a fickle first 6 weeks or first 5 weeks of the season. A lot of hate going out on the Twitterverse with players not getting sacks every week and then kind of disappearing and stuff like that. Sacks are hard to come by. If you get 8 or 9 in a season, you had a great season. These players like Granderson, who's been on a 4-game streak, or technically 5 if you count the phantom sack, he's off to a great start, and definitely hopefully keeps it going. So I like that call a lot. A player that I really like heading into this week, and he's kind of a cheat code, Derick Barnes for the Detroit Lions. He's a cheat code. He's got that DL eligibility if you play on some platforms. I know Sleeper has him there, but he's basically playing this linebacker role. And Detroit is one of the few teams in the NFL that still kind of holds true to that 3 linebacker formations. A lot of teams are now scheming to the 2 linebacker looks with the 3 safeties. But Detroit, I don't know if that's a Campbell philosophy or whatever it is, but they're holding true to this 3 linebacker formations. And it's great for fantasy because Derick Barnes is kind of thriving in it. He's playing a ton of snaps now that he's healthy. He's played in 90% of snaps, 78% of snaps, 82, 91, and 94% of snaps. So a really, really healthy volume, especially from a defensive line position. And the thing that really is appealing about Barnes is he's got such a high tackle floor because he's basically a linebacker. Over his first 5 weeks, he's got a 6 combined tackles, 7 combined tackles with a sack in week 3, 7 combined tackles in week 4, and then 8 last week in week 5. So he's like the perfect defensive lineman to complement a really high upside player. And so if you're in a league that starts 2 or 3 defensive linemen, Barnes is an awesome play just because he provides such a high floor week in and week out. You can kind of risk it playing somebody a more upside, maybe a sack dependent player in one of your other positions. So it kind of helps in that regard. It also helps when you play opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. That definitely makes your job a lot easier. They're playing Kansas City this week, which has an over-under right now of 52 points. So, which lets me know that there's going to be a lot of plays in that game, which a lot of plays leads to good volume, and good volume could potentially mean to some good stats. So I really like Barnes this week. I know that he's kind of a tweener. I wouldn't want to start him as a linebacker necessarily, but if I can get him into my defensive line spot, I'm going to fire him up everywhere I can. So
That's an interesting one there. It's because you're really reliant on the Chiefs going to heavy 12 personnel quite a bit against the Lions this week in order to make that work. So the big factor is that the Lions just don't have a third safety. Like I don't know if they've had a third safety get a single snap in a game this year. If they haven't, I don't think I've seen it. So that's interesting. And the Chiefs did play quite a bit of 12 against the Jaguars in the Monday night game. They had Noah Gray out there for more than half the snaps, along with Travis Kelce playing his usual allotment. So it'll be interesting to see if the Chiefs decide to deploy Worthy and Thornton and who's the other fast guy, Marquise Hollywood Brown, all together and try to give that defense fits too, with considering the fact that they're down several cornerbacks. So that's going to be a fascinating game, and the over/under really suggested the track meet that it really could turn into.
Yep. And when you said that like Noah Gray was out there for as much as he did, I had a sweet prop going, and he's the only one that failed me. He couldn't get one catch for over 4.5 yards. So I saw him out there. I was like, just one grab, but then couldn't do it for me. So, but that's another show altogether. So
yeah, that's a rough break there.
It is when your 5-leg parlay breaks down because you take a stab at just getting 1 4.5-yard catch from a tight end that played heavy volume that just couldn't get one. So anyway, I'm over it now. My therapist says that acceptance is the first stage to recovery. So we'll go there. So
there you go.
Yeah. So who is a linebacker that you got? It's kind of an interesting call here. I'm kind of interested to hear this one. So tell me about this player.
I'm staying with the same game and the same team. I'm a little low on Jack Campbell this week. Now, if you got to start 3 linebackers, you're starting Jack Campbell probably, but but really this comes down to if you're starting 2, maybe you have another option, and definitely don't start Alex Anzalone if you can help it. The Chiefs have been a team that has really the linebackers facing the Chiefs have really scored below their regular averages, and that's including calculating in the damage that the Jaguars linebackers did in the Monday night game. Devin Lloyd, everybody saw the pick 6 that he had running the ball back 99 yards. He only had 2 tackles in that game, which is kind of fascinating. But meanwhile, Foye Oluokun had 14 combined tackles. I think it was 7 solos and 7 assists. But it's been a bit of a feature of playing the Chiefs this year. And a big factor in that is the teams that play man coverage tend to generate fewer tackle opportunities for their linebackers. And the Chiefs, the conventional wisdom, I think, among fans is that you want to play too high against the Chiefs and stay in zone and try to prevent big plays. Well, the Chiefs have developed counter punches for that approach. And so the Jaguars played a lot of too high zones against the Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes threw for over 300 yards, had 141 passer rating, something like that. The Jaguars showed some relatively few number of snaps, but in those snaps, Mahomes was 2 of 9 passing with the interception and a touchdown. And we've seen several other teams through the course of 5 weeks now be successful using man coverage against Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs. It's a bit of a risk. They have 3 receivers that can run a sub 4.40. But the Lions have are a little bit more of a man team. They're less of a man team this year relative to last, but I think they might pick it up a little bit more and still play man. They're still playing at 30-some% of the time, which is still relatively high by current year NFL standards, and they might show a little bit more. I think they're going to be in a spot due to injuries and losses in the cornerback position where they've got to try to generate some turnovers. They're not going to contain the Chiefs' offense. I think, like we talked about with the line 52.5, it's going to be up and down the field. And so I think they've got to try to take some chances, get into some man coverages, and try to generate some turnovers. And as a result, I think that the linebackers' productivity falters a bit from where it's been. Most folks are looking at Campbell's tackle totals. I think he has 3 games of 11 tackles, 2 games of 8 tackles. And I think he's finally turned the corner that they wanted when they drafted him as a LB1 in Dynasty all those years ago. And I would say that that's still true, but I think you've got to temper expectations on it there. If you're only starting 2 linebackers, maybe you got somebody else. If you're starting 3, I guess you suck it up and roll them. But again, Alex Anzalone can stand your bench this week if you can afford to keep him there. Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting to just see like the kind of the ebb and flow of the game. And from week to week, like a lot of these players are just, it's, the what have you done for me lately kind of mantra, but it's truly week to week. On the offensive side of the ball, we can definitely get away with that and kind of ride the hot hand. But, on the IDP side, there is no hot hand. It's matchup dependent. And we've seen that time and again, week in and week out. So Tripp, we're going to flip to our linebackers here that we like this week. And you've got an aging star that's been kind of getting some heat the last couple of weeks, but you like him in week 2. Tell us why.
Yeah, Lavonte David has had an up and down season so far. He has had 3 games with at least 9 combined tackles and 2 games with 3 or fewer combined tackles, which is just a real clunker if you've got a guy that you drafted to be your LB1 showing up with 3 tackles. Like we talked about Devin Lloyd, he's able to cover it up with a big play. That being said, Lavonte David is capable of the big plays. He has a sack and a half on the season. He has 4 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, as I recall. And so I like him a lot. I think he's got an opportunity here to pick it up a little bit and do a little more this week in a favorable matchup.
Yeah, and I almost had Savoy Dennis as my linebacker here just for many of the same reasons. Love the matchup, right? He's like one of the very high consistent tackle floor. And so like he was right there with David. And I like David a little more maybe in some big play leagues just because of the fact that he's been getting up those quarterback rushes and some hits, and then which leads to some tackles. And we all know those can lead to some fumbles too. So I did pivot from Dennis. I'm going to go with Payton Wilson as my linebacker here this week. I know that we're just a few weeks removed from Payton Wilson and Cole Holcomb splitting time in week 3, but Payton Wilson did rebound in a big way in week 4 with 87% of the tackles. And fresh coming off the bye, Wilson and the Steelers get a primo matchup against the Browns, who are just oozing points to opposing linebackers this season. And a big reason for that is Quinshon Judkins. He's running really angry. And when you have an angry running back like that and a rookie quarterback in Dillon Gabriel, we're going to have that short passing game, the intermediates, nothing downfield, really, really quick. And Wilson is poised to have a solid game because that's right in his wheelhouse, right where he's going to be attacking the ball. His PFF scores are really nothing to write home about, but he's a really, really solid tackler who already has 35 combined tackles on the season. And that's with their bye out of the way already. And so he's got the super high tackle floor. He's got in his 4 games this season. He has 6 tackles, 7 tackles, 8 tackles, and 14 tackles in week 4. And so coming off the bye, getting a little healthier. I really like Wilson this week against the Browns. I just think with Quinshon Judkins running the way he does, he's going to run, 15, 16 times. And Wilson has a really good opportunity to soak up, 50% of those tackles. So I like that tackle floor for him.
Yeah, I think there's value in that too. Like you were saying with the running game and the short passing, you see that same formula working for both Wilson and for Lavonte David. David's playing San Francisco, and you saw against the Rams last Thursday night that they were not able to really throw the ball down the field much until late. But a lot of crossers, a lot of stuff over the middle, giving linebackers an opportunity to make some plays in the ball. A lot of Christian McCaffrey too. And also, what's interesting about 49ers is that they're playing with a higher tempo. Than they typically have. So it's just simply 5 more snaps per game, which somebody might make a tackle. And in Wilson's case, you've got Dillon Gabriel. He only completed 30% of his passes that he threw 10 plus yards down the field. So again, not able to complete the long passes. And Jerry Jeudy has been just abysmal this year. It's a good route runner that seems to wilt at the catch point, as I saw Matt Waldman tweet the other day. So he's really reliant on the tight ends and the running backs to make things happen. So I like the Payton Wilson call too.
And to the point about the tight ends, so that like they're great streaming options. Njoku, Fannin are like really soaking the targets up because they're those 7-8 yard routes, nothing downfield. It's got to get quick. Whether it's Gabriel's arm strength or just the offensive line or whatever it is, it wasn't any better with Flacco there. So we'll just kind of keep things going the same there. Heading to our defensive back position that we like, we got a pair of, I guess you kind of called out the entire secondary here, but one player in particular that you like for week 6.
Yeah, looking at the Cowboys secondary, I think is interesting. They've been a little up and down as well. Donovan Wilson opened the season with literally a single assist to his credit in week 1 against Philadelphia. It was pretty shocking in the sense that Philadelphia has over the last couple of years been a team that does push fantasy opportunities to the safeties with Dallas Goedert and Saquon Barkley. So it was interesting to see how little he did. And he's a guy that folks might have given up on. But and one reason why is that he has not had the opportunity to make big plays as he's had in years past. In previous defensive coordinators have sought to use him as a blitzer and attacking the offensive backfield, and Eberflus has not done that. That said, Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, has got to try to figure out a way to generate some pressure. Just sending 4 and sitting back has not been successful. And I don't think that Bryce Young and the Panthers are going to be too hard to rattle if they would just go on ahead and try to make some noise against him. But nevertheless, the Panthers have been a good matchup for safeties in the year, in the sense that they've had 2 close games and 3 games that were not close. The 2 games that were close, they played the Dolphins and the Cardinals. The Cardinals and Dolphins safeties, Jalen Thompson had 10 combined tackles. Minka Fitzpatrick had 9. Budda Baker had 8. Ashton Davis had 5, playing in a part-time role, as did Ifeatu Melifonwu with 5 combined tackles. A lot of tackle opportunities over the middle of the field with Bryce Young. He's not really able to challenge the boundaries to the same extent of a lot of more prolific NFL quarterbacks. And I think we'll continue to see with Rico Dowdle's success last week. I think we'll see again running, Ted McMillan attacking short to intermediate areas of the field. Lots of opportunities for tacklers. And if Donovan Wilson is not available on your waiver wire and you need a waiver wire guy, the other safety is Juanye Thomas, whose brother Zaire Thomas is a cornerback for the Jets. And apparently their parents said yay every time they had a kid. But nevertheless, both of those two guys are still Juanye Thomas and Donovan Wilson are susceptible in coverage. Neither of them are particularly strong sitting back there, the 2 high shells that Eberflus uses. And so I think that the Panthers go after them. And so I like both as good volume tacklers this week.
And I like this idea too, because we saw Jack Sanborn leave the game with a concussion. And so that might bring in a little more opportunity, maybe some plays, get to that second or third level of the defense. And that might give Wilson a little bit more opportunity. He's only rostered right now in 19% of sleeper leagues. So there's a really good chance that he's probably available. You know, and as we head into these bye weeks and with injuries mounting on the teams, those are players that you're going to kind of want to be like on the short list for players to pick up. So, yeah, we just hope we run into one of these Carolina games that's a competitive game. It keeps it close. I know that the Cowboys offense has just been a juggernaut, even without CeeDee Lamb, which is kind of amazing. So we'll see what kind of game we get on Sunday.
And a bunch of backup offensive linemen too. It was, of course, it helps when you play the Jets, Panthers, and things like that. But, the Panthers are 2-0 at home, and I think they'll put up a fight. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But we could have a lot of offense this week, which would be nice, as there's been some pretty off weeks.
There have been some pretty rough scoring weeks so far. Are the Jets the only winless team right now? I think everyone got off the schneid last week. The Saints and the Giants got wins last week, and I think the Jets are the only one without a win.
The Giants got a win 2 weeks ago and lost to the Saints last week. Yeah, so I think it's the Jets that are the only one this year.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll see.
Yeah.
A player that I kind of like this week in the secondary, and typically I don't like unless it's a cornerback required league, is starting cornerback, but Tyrique Stevenson is kind of making me change my tune a little bit. He has had plenty of opportunity in the Bears secondary. Talk about a banged up unit right now. I don't know if they've had all of their secondary pieces even healthy during the preseason, let alone the regular season. The bye probably couldn't come at a better time for the team. Stevenson has played all but 2 snaps so far this season, which is great, chasing that volume all the time, especially at the defensive back position. Stevenson has been on a heater lately, and we don't leave the table when we're on a heater. Apparently that's what I learned from watching a great movie. But in the last 3 weeks, he has 5 and 2 tackles. He has 2 tackles and an assist, a forced fumble, and a pass defense. And then last week, or prior to the bye week, he had 4 tackles, 2 assists, 2 pass defense, and an interception. So really, really high volume, not only in tackle leagues, so he's got that high floor, but he's also making the splash plays with the forced fumbles and the INTs. So like really, really potential for a weekly difference maker. Like I mentioned, with that solid tackle floor, it kind of negates that boom bust that we see sometimes with other defensive back positions, especially at the corner. Sometimes they can just like disappear or ghost you on a week. And that's definitely not what you want as we head into week 6. His PFF metrics are solid, which is great to see. So not only is he playing well, but he's scoring well PFF wise. So that ensures that he's going to be on the field. He's got a nice matchup with the Washington Commanders this week. Jaden Daniels is back. We'll probably see a little bit more passing than we did last week. see some maybe some longer sustained drives, which leads to some nice volume for Stevenson. I don't think we're going to see Terry McLaurin this week, which maybe hurts Stevenson's chances at a big week. But I still think he's going to be definitely involved in the defensive side. The only hiccup, like I mentioned, he plays exclusively on the outside. I think he's like 92% of his snaps are taking place on the outside, which is kind of contrarian to what we preach often, is like we like those box snaps. But, sometimes during these bye weeks and with injuries, you got to kind of think outside the box a little bit. And I think Stevenson is a solid play.
Well, Stevenson, one thing that's interesting about him is that he's plays quarterback for Dennis Allen. And Dennis Allen is the defensive coordinator for the Bears, but was the defensive mind for the Saints for 8 years or so prior to the season. And we could always rely on a boundary corner being a productive tackler and a compiler on the Saints throughout most, if not all, of his years there. And that's translated to Chicago to a pretty good extent here. And it's in part because he's aggressive. Dennis Allen is. And so they're looking to generate turnovers. They're looking for players to get their hand on the ball, break up passes a little bit more than a team like Dallas, where they sit back in these soft zones. But the second thing is that Tyrique Stevenson, Rod IQ, is top 10 in the NFL quarterbacks in run defense tackles. Like you said, he's able to make plays in both phases, and so that makes him an attractive quarterback play this week for sure.
Yeah, and I think Johnny would agree too. Like it's those matchup dependent and things, and I think we could probably get a better matchup, in other weeks. But like we said, bye weeks are an ugly thing. We've got 2 teams on a bye this week. We're already down, and players are dropping like flies. We're at the third way part of the season, and it's already like that laundry list of players, especially on some of my rosters, looks like a mash unit kind of right now. So we're kind of hurting. So. All right, before we get to the players, we're going to throw a little cool water on this week. Let's recap our players that we're fired up about. We've got at the defensive line position, Carl Granderson and Derick Barnes. At our linebackers, Lavonte David and Payton Wilson. And at our defensive back position, Donovan Wilson and Tyrique Stevenson. So let's flip it now, Tripp, to players that we're kind of a little maybe cooler on than consensus right now. And who's that defensive lineman that's kind of lower on your list?
Well, I think that this might be a bit of a surprise, but Josh Sweat is a guy that I have some concern for this week, and there's some really good reasons why. There's some reasons why people should be optimistic too. Sweat is one of the league leaders in pass rush win rate, according to ESPN's reporting of NFL Next Gen stats, and he's had sacks, I think, in 3 consecutive weeks, and he had 2 sacks last week against the Titans and 4 tackles, which doubled his previous totals from the previous couple of games. And the reason why he needed to double them is because he's only playing about half of the snaps. The Cardinals are pretty religiously rotating their 1s and their 2s in an almost equal rotation. And so Sweat is playing really well, and maybe that's part of the formula is to only play half the snaps. But when you're only playing half the snaps, you have a really low floor. And so what's really fascinating this week, too, is I'm going to say something which my ears still can hardly believe. Danny Dimes is hardly taking any sacks. So we thought that he had the pocket awareness of lint, but apparently he's able to avoid sacks this year. So I don't know how it's happening, but it is. And so I have some concerns about Sweat's ability to get to the passer. And when he's only out there for 30 or 35 snaps, it just exacerbates that concern. So you like Sweat, but he's just that real boom bust option. He reminds me of the classic, WR3, who's the fast guy who you need a long touchdown from to win your week. It's like Deshaun Jackson on offense or something. He's just an edge 3, and you can't reliably plug him in there unless the matchup's good. And so this is a week where, shockingly, you've got to sit him against Danny Dimes.
And it's interesting because Sweat and Baron Browning were on the episode last week because they were playing the Titans, and the Titans seem to be a team. If they're like they're the poster child for streaming options for the defensive line position, because Cam Ward's taking a ton of sacks. That offensive line is a turnstile. Fire up anybody who's playing the Tennessee Titans. And last week it paid off, and like this week, like you said, it's that what have you done for me lately kind of mentality. Is like, you know what? It might have been a hot hand last week, but this week we gotta cool it. And especially like you said, with Sweat having 3 consecutive games with sacks, that's a tough sit. And so, but I think you brought out some great points about not playing every snap. I think he's in his like 7th or 8th year after he was kind of re-signed from the Eagles there. So not not a shoe-in even on a short list of players this week. So a player that I'm kind of cool on, not only this week but this season, and a lot of peeps had him kind of propped up this year, was Will McDonald. And Will McDonald is a player that kind of had flashes the last couple seasons or last season, and just kind of was like, he's going to be the next big thing. But so far we haven't seen it yet this year. He's kind of running solo right now. Jermaine Johnson is kind of banged up, so that doesn't help. Offensive coordinators can kind of key in on him, go away from his side, so they don't have a lot to worry about with this defensive front right now, and that probably makes things harder for McDonald. Not only is things being maybe schemed away from him, but he's not doing himself any favors. He's off to a super slow start this season. He did have a nice week one. He had 2 tackles and an assisted tackle with 2 sacks. But since then, he only has had 4 combined tackles and no sacks. Lots of single-digit scoring, which hurts in leagues where you only start 2 or 3 defensive linemen. And those are leagues where there are so much better options out there right now. If you're playing in a league with 2 or 3 defensive linemen, McDonald can't be in your lineup just because there's such better scoring options, more consistent. And Denver this week is not a great matchup for opposing defensive linemen. The quarterback, Bo Nix, doesn't get sacked. Their offensive line is doing a pretty good job keeping him protected. Nix is doing a great job evading and getting ready to the ball, so he doesn't get sacked. So combined low tackle numbers that he's been getting, plus the sacks aren't happening, I just think he's a really poor start in week 6. I think you'd have to be in a start 4 or 5 league to even consider McDonald this week. So,
yeah, I think that I saw that the Broncos are the league's leading unit as an offensive line in pass rush and pass protection. So, yeah, I agree. The Jets are set this week, all of them. I guess you've got Quinn and Williams, maybe you've got to start it, but you can't be excited about starting Will McDonald. And what's interesting too is, like you mentioned, he doesn't have a lot of help. Jermaine Johnson's been dinged up. Even still, he's only playing 58% of snaps or something like that. It's like they're just not able to rely on him as as that volume player either. So I still think that he's has potential. I think he could probably emerge, but it's just certainly not going to happen this week.
It kind of made me think of something, Tripp. Do you think players, we all love the Max Crosbys of the world because they're playing 85-90% of snaps from the defensive position, which is freakish. It's unheard of. But then you just mentioned, Josh Sweat, super effective in his 50% of snaps. Do coaches, you feel that coaches try to have a philosophy, or do they kind of go player by player dependent? Maybe Will McDonald in a different scheme is playing 80-90% of snaps and he's a low-end defensive lineman 1, but in this scheme, in this system, he's playing in his rotation and he's just kind of capped? Or do you feel that it's just more player dependent?
I think there's a little bit of both, but I think there's definitely some coordinators, especially some of the 3-4 coordinators, they have 3 edges that they're rotating through. The Rams being a good example, where they got 2 guys in Jared Verse and Byron Young that are playing a bunch of snaps, 80% of snaps. And there's only really 1 edge rusher that's playing any volume behind them. Yes, there's a 4th edge rusher. He's getting 5 or 10 snaps a game. And then you compare that with what the Cardinals are doing. And the Jonathan Gannon's the defensive mind there. He was the Eagles defensive coordinator prior to his visit to the desert. And the Eagles for a long time did that. It's more of a platoon than a rotation. The 1s come on, the 2s come on. And the Bills were a team that were known for doing that for quite a while too. Sean McDermott comes from an Eagles tree as well, and so that's a big difference. If you can find that team that is Steelers, another example, where you've got when healthy, Highsmith or Watt playing huge snaps and Nick Herbig being the 3rd guy. And so if you can find that team where there's a 3-man rotation rather than a 4-man platoon, so to speak, then you have a big leg up. And so that's one of the things I try to run up with Summers to try to look at how that would work. I did think the Jets would rely a little more heavily on 2 guys because of the limited personnel that they have. But that has, so there's a personnel piece to it, and there's a schematic piece to it where they kind of get locked into a rotation and with the sense of how they want to do it, and it's a hard balance. The coaches like to say we got to get our best 11 on the field, and there's definitely something to that. But there's something to be said for the idea of the rotation and keeping guys fresh too. So it's really hard to, I think it's really hard to predict. But Max Crosby is a bit of a unicorn in that he's able to play 90% of snaps, and just most guys just can't keep that up week in, week out. So.
And that totally makes sense, because we see players all the time leave one team and then all of a sudden just thrive in another environment. Van Ginkel comes to mind a couple seasons ago. He left Miami. He was, and then all of a sudden went to Minnesota under Brian Flores and just kind of came out of nowhere and was this amazing. Well, you use the word unicorn. He had an amazing season. He was a defensive lineman, won across many leagues, and probably was a league winner for a lot of managers. And, we see it go the opposite way too. These really stud defensive ends flourishing, and all of a sudden they go to a new team and just kind of what happened to them. So I think that there's a lot to be said with that.
I think that's in a lot of positions too. I mean, we talked about Danny Dimes, who I learned yesterday from Pro Football Reference that one of his nicknames is Vanilla Vic. So I take that. But Vanilla Vic playing for Shane Steichen, I mean, it's been a revelation. And I really think a lot of credit is due to Shane Steichen. I mean, Shane Steichen was credited with really helping Jalen Hurts take a big step a few years ago when he was the Eagles offensive coordinator. And what Daniel Jones is doing is amazing. And so I 100% think that just simply being in the right system with the right coach makes a big difference. Devin Lloyd is another example. He's in a scheme that seems to be more suited to him, and he's gone from being a part-time player to a breakout player too. So I 100% think that the fit and the scheme make a big difference. But it's so I think your original question started with utilization, and utilization is that's a big factor, right? If you're going to have a 3-man rotation, but simply being a good player and being in a system where you're valued. I mean, Andrew Van Ginkel, for example, he came up. I think he was drafted by Brian Flores when Flores was the defensive coordinator in Miami, or head coach in Miami. Now he's the defensive coordinator in Minnesota, and he had revamped his scheme and had a vision as to how to use Van Ginkel, and it was and Van Ginkel flashed a little bit. I was on the IDP, the Big Three IDP show, probably 4 years ago, talking to Van Ginkel, and who?
Yep.
And we got a good laugh on there. We were calling him Rip Van Winkle because he was a sleeper, and he didn't really emerge that year. This was 2-3 years ago, and so sure enough, he gets back to Flores, back in the right system. If you think about Van Ginkel, he was the nickel off-ball linebacker in week 1 of his one season that he played for Vic Fangio. And then they moved him to edge, in part because of injuries among the other edge defenders. But it really can be an enormous difference how a player fits on the scheme and a coaching staff.
And all it takes is to be a Wisconsin Badger and be on your second team, because we saw it with Van Ginkel, we saw it with Zach Baun. Just whenever a Badger goes to a second team, that you got to look out on the IDP side. So we'll keep.
But you can't undervalue the try hard piece, right? I mean, I think there's probably I've seen this said many times. There's a small percentage of guys that are just superior athletes, and they're going to win. They're going to be successful almost no matter what. And then the other 95% of the guys, it's who's willing to work. And a lot of these Wisconsin guys come out with a work ethic. They're willing to work. T.J. Edwards is another one, undrafted free agent, I think, and he's had a long, successful NFL career.
Sanborn, yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's not talk about the current Badgers right now, because it's a rough watch on Saturdays. So we'll leave that to another episode. So I know you kind of teased this out already as a linebacker. You're kind of fading it after I kind of was propping up Barnes a little bit. You kind of jumped in on the fading Jack Campbell here. Any other reasons to fade Campbell this week? I know you mentioned about the matchups and playing man and things like that, but if you want to touch back on the Campbell fade.
I got us out of order there. I got so excited about linebackers and Lions, so I apologize for that. But no, it's really about the concern for the matchup and the Chiefs looking to get the perimeter receivers involved against some frightening quarterback options that the Lions are able to trot out there, and then the need for the Lions to try to force turnovers and go into man. I think Jack Campbell has to turn his back a little bit more often than he might like and be less involved. The flip side of that is with, like you mentioned, the 52.5 line. The pace could be really high. It could be a productive game, but I just think there's a lot of downside on this.
With the Lions, they put another defensive back on IR today, I think, too. They're a really banged up unit. I saw Amon-Ra is questionable. He'll probably play, but this is almost feeling like that I don't want to call it a trap game because it's a big game that obviously both teams are going to be up for. But like this is like that Detroit Lions game that they probably have a realistic chance of losing. Kansas City's kind of a dangerous team. They, probably a little upset about the way that they lost and dropped the ball in Jacksonville on Monday night. And, this could be a revenge narrative here. So,
yeah, the Chiefs won. They were 11-0 in 1-score games last year. I think they're 0-3 this year. Maybe 1-3. But those razor thin margins in the NFL. I still think the Chiefs are good team. You mentioned it being a trap game. I think it'll be another 10 losses before anybody thinks so with the Chiefs as being a trap game option.
I think that's one of the games everyone circles, right? The season, the schedule comes out. That's the circle. Yep.
Yeah. They're getting your best shot every week.
Well, one linebacker that I'm kind of fading this week, and he's been kind of a linebacker that's been kind of not getting a lot of positive pub this year, and that's Zaire Franklin. I hate to keep hammering on the guy because he's been such a stalwart for IDP for several seasons, but I just keep seeing him getting projected as a top 10 linebacker week in and week out. And I almost feel like it's my civic duty to keep informing everyone that he's not playing like a top 10 linebacker right now. I don't know if he's still hampered a little bit by the ankle injury. He's playing a good, healthy amount of snaps, but he just doesn't seem to be as productive as he was in previous seasons. He's currently the linebacker 37 in Big 3 scoring right now, far off the pace of where managers were drafting him. He has 296 snaps this season, 29 tackles and 1 sack. That's about a 10% tackle rate. And with a player like Zaire Franklin, we're expecting that number to be closer to like 15 or 16% like he has over his career. And that's a huge fall off from where we see right now. He's also has his lowest PFF score of his entire career at 47.4 overall, which is like almost half of what we've come to expect from a player like Zaire Franklin. And so I don't know if it's father time, the injury, or maybe even the scheme change in defense. I know that they're doing a lot more man's instead of the zone. I think all of these things are kind of catching up with them, and we have like a lot of question marks. I see that they put Joe Bacci on IR today. They signed Jermaine Pratt. And so, Indianapolis has been in the past a system where 2 linebackers have been very like plentiful. We saw EJ Speed and Franklin do really, really well. Both finished as top 10 linebackers last season. So is it a missing piece playing next to him? I know everyone was kind of propping up Jalen Carlise at the start of the season, and he's been, MIA at the moment. So I don't know. Where are your thoughts, Tripp, with Franklin? Is he just kind of on the back nine of his career, kind of slowly fading away, or is this just a victim of circumstance with the ankle and scheme change and everything?
Well, I think has a lot to do with the scheme change, and I honestly I don't think that Franklin was ever that great of a player. I think that he was in the middle of Gus Bradley's zone defense for many years. The Colts were one of the 2 or 3 most frequent zone teams throughout Gus Bradley's tenure. And Pro Football Focus publishes a stat that I felt like was true for a long time, but never had the numbers to prove it. But John Macri tweets it out now on Twitter. And he shows tackle rates, tackles per snap based on coverage. So broken out. So you see the zone coverages are all like 13, 14, 15, 16%. And then you see man coverage and it's like 9%. So it's quite simple. If your back is turned to the ball, then you're less likely to make it to the line of scrimmage, and you're less likely to make a tackle. Zaire Franklin in the middle of the Gus Bradley's cover 3, which he just relentlessly played. Zaire Franklin's in the middle field. He's facing the line of scrimmage, and he's piling up tackles. It was the old bend don't break. You saw Bobby Wagner do it too for many years in Seattle for Pete Carroll and Gus Bradley when he was the defensive coordinator there. They just are willing. Their strategy was a bend don't break strategy. Force the ball underneath, come up, make tackle. And you saw Zaire Franklin able to execute that fairly effectively. But this guy was a special teamer. Prior to Gus Bradley getting there, Franklin was a special teamer. They had what's his name? Bobby Okereke was there, and they had Anthony Walker, and those guys were starters. And then, Okereke left, and Franklin takes over. And he's the, been, 3-4 years now as the LB1 there. But I really think this has a lot to do with the combination of the fact that Franklin's not that good, the fact they're playing more man, as you mentioned. And finally, this defense is getting off the field. The Colts defense played an enormous number of snaps last year, and it drove up tackle volume numbers for Nick Cross and for Jalen Jones, the quarterback. And so just a confluence of events. Really, just there are fewer tackle opportunities for Franklin, and he's not going to offset it with big plays because he's not Fred Warner.
And I know you were not joking about how well Vanilla Vic has been playing this year, but like they've been in some really lopsided wins where they've been resting their starters for some, if not all, of the fourth quarter. I remember like week 2, Zaire Franklin didn't play like a single snap almost the whole fourth quarter. And, like to your point, if you're not on the field, you can't make tackles. And if you're already kind of being schemed out of opportunities, losing a fourth of an opportunity, or a fourth of a game to make opportunities, that's huge. So no, I think that's a great point. Something I didn't even consider, like when you were talking about the scheme change and everything like that, with him playing like just in a bend don't break situation. So just got to follow that Gus Bradley defense all over, and you'll be fantasy gold.
And you have it now, and back in Las Vegas, and who's piling up tackles? Devin White. Cover 3.
We had him on week 2. He was week 2 call out. So yeah, got some side eyes on that one, but so far it's looking pretty good. So, So this one's going to hurt me because I am a huge fan of the defensive backs for the Rams, but why are we not a fan this week of the Rams defensive backs here, especially Kam Curl?
Yeah, Kam Curl is coming off a game with 2 picks, or was it 2 weeks ago with 2 picks? And so, yeah, I can certainly appreciate that he's been on a heater, as they say. So, but I like him. I think he's a pretty good player. His role is not drastically different than what we've seen in years past. He's still the strong safety in the single high defense, which is good. He's playing in a lot of dime opportunities, which is good. For Quentin Lake is the other safety, but I don't think that the matchup is quite there this week, and so this is a guy that for me is not one of those must start kind of guys. But who they're playing this week is the Ravens and Cooper Rush, and first of all, I think we can expect a much lower tempo game from the Ravens. In the last couple of years with Lamar Jackson quarterback, they've been up close to the top of the league in terms of plays per game, in terms of total pace. With Cooper Rush at quarterback, they're slowing it down, trying to obviously run the football. And people will say, well, what about Rush throwing all those interceptions and Jalen Petre? Yeah, I hear all that. The last time that Cooper Rush played for an extended period when his starter was absent with injury was Dak Prescott a couple of years ago. And in the first game that Cooper Rush played, he was equally terrible, just like he was in last week against Houston. Houston has really good defense, by the way. The Rams are good, but they're quite as good as Houston, in my opinion. So what I expect is Cooper Rush to settle in a little bit, play a little bit more effectively. I think the Ravens in general will show more fight. And so, Mark Andrews isn't quite the same player he used to be. And so I'm just not expecting as many tackle opportunities. And yeah, the interceptions might be there, but I have a little more faith in Cooper Rush than that. And it's really hard to bank on interceptions.
And they're not a very sticky stat to they're like sacks. They're tough to predict. How are you feeling about Quentin Lake? Because he plays a little bit different role on that team. He's more of that slot guy. So is he a little bit safer play than Kam Curl because of the lineup, or are you still fading all?
Yeah, a little. I mean, in the fact that you got Zay Flowers there, but you're still looking at you're looking at possibly the fewest snaps per game, a game in an offensive plays executed by the Ravens of any team in the NFL. There's a guy named David Winks who does a snap projection and posted on Twitter, and he's got the Ravens as like 50 snaps, which is really low. And so one thing that's been interesting too is that it seems like a lot of teams are playing a slow pace this year, and so you got to be mindful of the pace. Like last year, I think there were only 3 teams with less than 60 snaps per game, and this year there's like 11. And some are really low, like 50 is super low because you're expecting it to be like 60 to 65, and then you got a few outliers to either end of that. And so, yeah, I just think the total number of tackle opportunities with fewer snaps is going to be a problem for really all Rams tacklers. And then, like I said, I don't think that you can count on interception opportunities because I think that Cooper Rush will clean it up a little bit. I think the Ravens will be more competitive this week.
Do you think that's like a coaching scheme, or some of these teams are obviously dealing with some quarterback issues? Hey, let's run fewer plays. Let's control the clock. Let's try to keep it close. We can't get in a shootout. Mm-hmm. So let's play, 50, 60 snaps this game. Let's not try to keep pace with like a Detroit that's running, 60, 70 plays a game. Is that kind of a philosophy, coaching philosophy going into these games?
Your quarterback's command of the offense makes a big difference. Watch that Jacksonville game. Trevor Lawrence can make every throw there is. He doesn't still have full command of Liam Cohen's offense. Granted, it's only 4 weeks in, but if you're eating up every play clock every time, then you're slowing the game down. To the flip side, if you're a guy like Patrick Mahomes who can practically read Andy Reid's mind, you can play as fast as you want. And sometimes you want to play fast. You want to stop the defense from substituting if you can. And if you get the defense on their heels, you get the pass rushers tired, you just lay into them. And so a lot of it has to do with the quarterback and coach relationship. That being said, it's interesting that the Packers continue to be a little bit slower paced team, a little bit more running as well. And that may be more of a coaching style for LaFleur. Maybe he just feels like that he needs Jordan Love to take his time. It may be just who he feels like Jordan Love's quarterback is. Liam Cohen is obviously finding out, who Trevor Lawrence's quarterback is, and he may never get to that high tempo formula.
Good stuff there, sir. I'm going to stick in this game, and I'm going to flip to the opposite side on the defensive back. I'm going to go with Kyle Hamilton as my fade this week. I know that he missed last week's game with a groin injury, and I know that those are really like slow healing injuries. So even if he does play this week, I still might wait just with the possibility, with the re-injury possibility. And I would hate to like have him go out there for 3 or 4 plays, just say, no, can't go. And then you get a goose egg. The Ravens do have a bye in week 7. So this just might be one of those, like, you know what, let's sit him again. We'll get that extra week of rest. Let's come back after the bye. Our schedule gets much easier from the Ravens standpoint. I think they take on, I think they have the second easiest schedule for the second half of the season. Hopefully they get Lamar Jackson back. Roquan Smith might come back, so all of a sudden the team gets super healthy. So let's just play it safe. The Ravens did also add a couple safeties this week. They traded Aloha Gilman in the Harbaugh for Harbaugh trading sweepstakes. They kind of did a deal there. I think that might have more of an impact on Malachi Starks than it does maybe Hamilton's role, but they also added CJ Gardner-Johnson to their practice squad. And so not that I see Hamilton kind of getting phased out or replaced, but his role could definitely change. And we love the role that Hamilton plays. He kind of plays that in the box, kind of like that third linebacker who's not really a linebacker role. And so who knows between the injuries and all these additions to the secondary here, where it might be. Before we get to the last part of the show, Trip, I want to ask, is Kyle Hamilton, I know we don't really advocate going after and buying or acquiring defensive backs often, but is Hamilton a buy or a sell for you at the moment with the current state of his health and the Ravens?
But it's hard to answer in the sense that whoever has Kyle Hamilton probably wants the sunk cost fallacy. They probably want whatever they put into him. And if that's the case, well, you can't do anything with that. If from a kind of a realistic lens, if someone's looking at his production to date and thinking that the Ravens defense is bad, and if there is a buy opportunity, if there is somebody willing to, I don't know, flip Tyrique Smith or something for him, then yeah, I would do that. I would dump Tyrique Smith. He's been productive, but Kyle Hamilton is a guy that's a game-changing type player. And I wrote a little bit of a thread on Twitter today about how I think this all fits together. And we'll see. I've got not only is Alohi Gilman there, but so is CJ Gardner-Johnson. Now, he's just on the practice squad. Not sure what that means yet. But I think the answer here is that the Ravens want to play more too high. They are one of the teams playing the least amount of too high, least amount of middle of the field open shells of any team in the NFL, which is kind of shocking because they were one of the league leaders in it. They were a big proponent of it in the recent years. And in that, especially in 2023, you saw Kyle Hamilton playing an overhang role and was really effective being kind of a defensive weapon with 2 safeties behind him. And I really think that the Ravens want Starks and Gilman to play behind and for Hamilton to play closer to the line of scrimmage more often and have more opportunities to impact the offense. And so I think who loses snaps from that is Teddy Buchanan once Roquan Smith gets back. So that's where I think the snaps come from. That also being said, the third safety that the Ravens have been trotting out there, Ruben Lowry, Sanusi Kane, those guys can't do it. So there was a need for upgrade at third safety. But I do think there's an opportunity for the Ravens to get back to a little bit more of their identity that they had under Mike McDonald. And I think that this trade helps to make that happen.
I saw something where they gave up more points through the first 5 weeks of the season than they did in almost all of 2023 or something like that. So you know,
The
like
2000
to your
Super Bowl
point too.
season.
I know that Zach Orr is not the defensive coordinator that McDonald was or is, or head coach, however you want to phrase that. But there's still a lot of pieces that are there, you know, so it's just, you know, like you said, injuries and, you know, just not playing out for him. So, all right. So looking at players that we're fading here before we get to our head scratchers, we're fading Josh Sweat and Will McDonald. We're fading Jack Campbell and Zaire Franklin. Kam Curl and Kyle Hamilton are also making our fade list this week. So naturally, all of those players are going to go off this week. So make sure they're in your lineups because that's just how this works. Yeah, it's just kind of funny how I don't know if they listen to our podcast and they just get fired up and it becomes locker room material or poster board material. But hey, whatever we have to do for the love of the game here. So,
well, I think there's value in saying that we try to give some players that make people think, right? I mean, we're not putting out softballs. Well, sit Trenton Simpson or something like that. We're not putting out softballs. We're giving people something to think about.
Yeah. Actually, Trenton Simpson might not be a sit this week, especially
as I said, right after I said it, like, yeah.
Right, yeah. It sounded way cooler in my head than it did when
I that's right. Yeah.
I do that all the time. I got a lot of that's my whole day. So so players that are kind of have a scratch in our head trip. So these are players that for whether it's draft capital, playing time, underperforming, overperforming, who's a player that you just like have a hard time like trying to figure out like why are they doing what they're doing?
Well, the player that I'm interested in this week, which I think is pretty interesting for a lot of reasons, is Upton Stout, who is the nickel for the San Francisco 49ers. The folks might have seen him play last Thursday night against the Rams. He had eight combined tackles, which was 6 of them were assists. But here's why he's interesting. It's because of the matchup playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, teams that play the Buccaneers, I should say, are blitzing from the slot at extraordinary rates. So Jalen Petre has 19 pass rush attempts on the season. 10 of them were against the Buccaneers. Nick Emenwari, I think it was his first game last week playing for Seahawks. He rushed 7 times, maybe not all from the nickel, but he was primary nickel. Billy Bowman, who was a rookie nickel for the Falcons, so only has like 6 pass rush attempts on the season, but 3 of them were against the Buccaneers. Every nickel that plays Tampa Bay rushes like as much as they have the entire rest of the season combined. And Upton Stout has done a little bit of that, but he comes into a matchup with the Bucs where every defensive coordinator is going to watch to see what the previous ones have done. And so Upton Stout has an opportunity to come in and make an impact in this game. That being said, these nickels aren't exactly getting home. Baker Mayfield has just been astonishingly crafty this year with a bunch of backup offensive linemen. So it's like, but just thinking about this in terms of like a sit-start situation, a lot of the listeners of this podcast are probably starting the Big 12 lineup, 3-3-3, 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 defensive backs. And they may not be on a guy like Stout, who's a part-time nickel with a cornerback designation in most leagues. So, but if you're streaming defensive backs and you're thinking, well, how can I get an interception there? How can I get a big play? Well, Upton Stout may be your opportunity to get a sack from a defensive back, a source that you're not necessarily thinking about. The issue, of course, is that he's nicked up. He's not playing full time, but I do like the opportunity to play against Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin, the Bucs. So there's also the fallback position of the tackle volume that he should have playing against a Bucs offense that's been able to move the ball. So it's like real hard to recommend a guy that's not playing full time, especially a rookie. But with those pass rush opportunities that other teams have used from the nickel, I'm interested to see if Stout can do the same thing and really capitalize.
I like this call. San Francisco has been getting the most out of their defense. They're super banged up on that side of the ball. And I think Salah's doing a fantastic job getting players. We got Sigel, who's doing a fantastic job this season, kind of an out of nowhere player. D Winters is playing really good. Fred Warner obviously is like amazing, but for a team that's been banged up on both sides of the ball as much as they have to be in the position, they shocked the world, I think, on Thursday night when they beat the Rams. I didn't think that was even a possibility. And they came in, Mac Jones like picked himself off the turf several times, and I just think that's speaks to the coaching staff there that to get them prepared week in and week out. And a player like Upton Stout definitely is a player to kind of monitor it, but a player that might be a little bit on the fade side. I might be starting Upton Stout instead of this player, Jessie Bates. Jessie Bates has just been having me scratching my head all season. great player in real life, super versatile, probably does more on the real NFL field on Thursdays, Sundays, Mondays, whatever day of the week that they're playing. But for fantasy, like, he's just not that player that he was in 2023. In 2023, Bates had 132 tackles on 1,066 snaps, 12.4% tackle rate. Amazing. He also had 3 forced fumbles, 6 INTs, and a touchdown that season. I think he was like the defensive back one that year. This season, in 2025, he has 24 tackles on 219 snaps. That's down to under 11% tackle rate. No double-digit scorings weeks yet this season. So probably asking, like, what happened? Xavier Watson, you already mentioned Billy Bowman. They happened. Both of those rookies are playing more snaps in the slot and in the box, especially Bowman, who the last couple of weeks has been outstanding. Watts has 4 consecutive weeks with double-digit scoring, while Bowman has 2 already to his credit, both more than Bates already. I think these rookies are here to stay. They're here to play, and I don't think they're going anywhere. And I think that Bates is going to, like, continue to kind of just be that mediocre name that we kind of keep putting in our lineup, kind of seeing in rankings higher because, in 2023, Jessie Bates did this, so let's put him up high. So I think he's getting that name recognition where he's not really doing the fantasy production. This is a classic example of why we always talk about fade the position, and it's easy to sit here now and say Bates was an easy fade, but at the time, he was probably a top 12 defensive back going off the board. And so this kind of brings me, Trip, to your safety dance spreadsheet that you kind of update and have. I love reading it over the offseason. There was a lot of, like, valuable insight there about players to, like, that you could go and scoop up off the waiver wire for next to nothing. I know that Johnny always talks about for the price of a mouse click. And there were several players on that safety dance spreadsheet that were available, even in some of my leagues. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and where can our listeners find that tool?
Sure. The Twitter app has been, I guess, a tremendous resource for us tonight here. The third or fourth time we mentioned it. But yeah, I started many years ago tracking, just literally in list form, what safeties in the NFL were box safeties. I did this on the Footballguys forum long before I started actually writing for Footballguys even. And I thought it was useful to keep an inventory of who was doing what. I really kind of crystallized for me why back in about 2017 or so. Carl Joseph was drafted, I think, in 2016 by the Raiders, and he was the next Keanu Neal, the next Landon Collins, and then the coaches all got fired in Oakland, and they brought in Paul Gunther to be the defensive coordinator. And Paul Gunther was kind of an oddball at the time because he was running cover 6. Like, what the heck is cover 6? This is back when everybody ran cover 3 all the time, or not everybody, but lots of teams. The reality is that there were probably half the NFL ran just a huge amount of cover 3, and then the other half was running a little bit more diverse things. And so I quickly realized that Paul Gunther was just going to kill Carl Joseph's value. I didn't think Carl Joseph was a very good player, but sometimes when you're a box safety, you don't have to be that good. Marcus Sigle being an example. But you've got with Paul Gunther running cover 3, it's like, this guy's not even going to, even if he's able to stay on the field for Paul Gunther, which he was not, he still was not going to have a lot of tackle opportunities. And so so from that just basic list, I built out a spreadsheet, which I maintain to this day. And it's gotten a whole lot harder to keep up with. I've added not only player roles and deployment, but also added the scheme piece. Do they play two high or one high? Do they play more man, less man? And so I try to keep up with all the depth chart motions and whatnot. And because a lot of these safety news, I mean, Marcus Sigle probably came out of nowhere. I'd genuinely be interested to know if anybody out there knew that Marcus Sigle was going to start week 1 ahead of Zaire Brown, and further, did they pick him up as a fantasy option? I mean, it's just really hard to do this and keep up with it. And so, I try to keep that resource out there for everybody. And so, speaking of Jessie Bates, I mean, Jessie Bates was not going to have a big box. He really never has. He's always been a little bit more of a free safety. You mentioned the 11% tackle rate. It's not bad, actually. He's just not getting those big plays. I haven't really had a chance to watch Atlanta play. But where Jessie Bates has been productive in years past is as a freelancer, playing out of structure. And he's been authorized to do that, wherein his running mate, whoever it is in that given year, will be tasked with playing very disciplined football, maintaining the assignment, and then And then Jessie Bates will have the opportunity to break free from the assignment and freelance. And I don't know if, without having watched, if he's getting those opportunities, if Jeff Albrook has tried to rein that in as the new defensive coordinator, or if Bates is just learning the defense and that those big plays could come. I wouldn't rule that out. Then again, Atlanta doesn't have the world's best defense or anything, so you got to wonder, what is their game plan? So that would be the only that's the thing that keeps in mind. You think about the ultimate freelancer was Ed Reed a long time ago. Ed Reed was either totally useless. Look at his it's like Pro Football Reference box scores. He's either totally useless or he was an absolute stud, even year to year, playing free safety for the Ravens because he didn't have a lot of tackle opportunities, playing a lot of single high looks. But I think Bates is like that too. So I think if I'm confused about him too because I don't know if he's having those opportunities to freelance. So it's hard to rely on him because of that. But like you said with defensive back, these things just change so significantly from year to year. Tyler Newman being another example. Tyler Newman was a box safety last year. This year he's playing interchangeably with Javon Holland. And it's really hard to see those things coming.
Yeah, and to the point that we keep making all the time, it's that position to fade because the further you are away from the ball, the more turnover there is from season to season. You're just not like that repeatability or those sticky stats that we like to think about. They just aren't as consistent, and like that's why the defensive linebackers are those more consistent pieces week in or season in and season out. And I guess this makes your tool even more valuable because you go to that tool, there were players like Will Harris, who unfortunately is on IR right now, but he was available in a lot of leagues and he was playing in that Kam Curl role, not Kam Curl, sorry. Jeremy Chin role that was so good last year. And if he would have stayed healthy, I could definitely see him having a very significant season, but those types of plays are league winning moves there and they cost you nothing. So very much appreciate that article and just keep up the work on that. Tripp, before we let you go here, a lot of managers right now we're 4-1, 3-2. Unfortunately, some of us are maybe 1-4 in some leagues. What's your kind of mantra, any tricks of the trade, anything that you want to pass on to the listeners about, roster construction at this point in the season?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Thanks also for the kind words on the spreadsheet. I'm glad to hear some use to folks. Always open to hearing feedback on it. There's a lot less engagement on the per app than there used to be. So, but the folks are always willing to reach out to me if they have questions or corrections. Even I think really early on, I think a reader pointed out that Christian Izine and Tyrique Smith had sort of swapped roles. This is June timeframe. So, but Tyrique Smith might have snuck up on folks if they weren't not monitoring depth charts and such. But in terms of changes for this time of year, it's almost like there's two seasons. And there's really 3 seasons if you think about playoffs. You have the month of September, no buys. You've drafted a team. And folks that have drafted their defensive backs, early and whatnot, they're all trying to go 4-0 in September. And, sometimes you get a draft that you feel like you hit on all your guys and you're setting lineups is super easy and you're just cruising. Well, the real game starts really last week with week 5 with 4 teams on bye. And then in week, 8, there are 6 teams on bye, I think. So yeah, that's when it gets serious. And that's where you're testing your strategy. Do you have an anti-fragility strategy? Do you have studs and duds? And if you have studs and duds, did you land on a few guys real late that are going to work, or do you have a waiver wire approach? And that's where, shows like this, where we try to give some tips of guys that may not be all that highly rostered in terms of how can you get a guy in there. So I think that's really important to bob and weave at this time of year. I have one team. I have one team that was 3-1 in September, but I had Joe Burrow. He got hurt, and so I'm ready to pull the plug because I don't see that it has legs to go. He has Buka too. Buka can't keep this up all year, so it's time to regroup for next year. And I have another team that's 2-5 because of doubleheaders. I feel confident in the depth that team is built, and that I feel like I will have an advantage going through the buys. There are sometimes where I'm trying just to go 2-2 in September, and then have a roster that I think is built to go to have a winning record in October, November, because they're all that come around that trade deadline. There are folks that are going to be ready to pull the plug, ready to deal assets and trade. And you're not trying to go 4-0 in September. You're trying to go 3-0 in December.
And those words that you just said just echoed last week with John Glosser. He kind of said the same thing about just being honest with yourself and your team. Like, you could have a 4-0 team that you don't feel really good about, but like you said, you could have a 2-2 team that you feel really strong about. Like, this is the team that's built for, not wins in September, because I don't think anyone hoists the hardware for going 4-0 in September. It's the end of the season. And, to your point about like Joe Burrow going down, depth is so important, and playing the waiver wire game. There's, this week there's so many players that you're just continually turning your roster over, and have players that you're willing to just like pull the plug on and keep trying to get that. Like, Shamari James is a good example. Like, he might be like the next flavor of the week there for the linebackers in Dallas. And, if he plays half as good as he did last week in replacement of Sanborn, you could be looking at a league winner right there. So good stuff, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for this. Oh, sorry.
How about you? What's your top tip?
My top tip is just keep playing the waiver wires, even if it's playing defense to keep players away from other teams. Like there are a lot of teams right now with quarterback issues. If you see like a Cooper Rush on the waiver, and you got a spot, add them just to keep them away from somebody else, or that becomes like a trade bait. They realize on Friday morning and Saturday they don't have a quarterback. Hey, all of a sudden you've got, if you can flip them for a third or a fourth or something like that, that's just smart, in my opinion. Just always trying to improve your roster, get those pieces, those little pieces that you can throw in on a bigger deal. Like, hey, I'll give you that third and this player, and like, oh, now I got a starter for the rest of the season at a defensive back position, and it costs you clicking the mouse on Cooper Rush. So, but
no, that's a great tip. Like playing defense, especially in redraft, if you can get a guy that you might say, I don't need anybody at that position, but you put in a bid, you might be surprised. You might get in a useful piece that you got relatively inexpensively that you kept from your opponent who might need that spot and hasn't really processed it on Monday or Tuesday night, and he might be looking at his roster on Thursday afternoon thinking, oh crap.
There's nothing better than outbidding another manager for like $1 and getting a player and then like sending them a trade offer on Wednesday after the waivers clear for that player. Like, hey, I got him for $27. I see you wanted him for 26. Here he is for a third. So
yeah, I know. That's so funny to me that but I get that offer occasionally too. It's like, yeah, I need a third or fourth. Are you kidding me?
Yep. Is $26 a fab worth a third round pick? I guess
exactly,
that's where you're at. So I don't think we play in any leagues together, so I don't send you any of those offers, but I got plenty of a lot of my text messages are from managers in my leagues, like giving me the eye roll and stuff like that. So they're used to my shenanigans. So
you must have a code name or something. One of my leagues where I get here's a backup quarterback, second round pick.
I gotta run surveillance now with some of my teams. So well, that's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Tripp again for coming on, sharing some fantastic knowledge about the game that we all love. Be sure to follow him and catch up on that tackle, the defensive back sheet, the spreadsheet that he makes, the safety dance. Every time I think about it, all I can do is think about Men with Hats or We Can Dance song. So maybe you got to have that kind of play in there. So
yeah, I can't. I had to Google. I was like, did anybody ever use this before? And sure enough, somebody back in 2011 wrote a column called Safety Dance. So I can't trademark it, but nevertheless, it's like it's a fun name, and you can find it on my hashtag on Twitter is @Dynasty Tripp, and you can find me also at footballguys.com, and I write about defensive backs there. The editors have not told me I write about defensive backs too much, but I probably do. So I'll keep some of it on for free over there on the Bird app, and let the Green Dot articles stay behind the paywalls.
Hey, that's great stuff. And like you said, you got a lot of great information over there. And if you're not already, make sure you follow Tripp. Make sure you watch his work over at Football Guys. So doing some great work over there, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Speaking of following, if you're not doing so already, please make sure that you like and subscribe to the show so we always are aware of the IDP content that's dropping here at the IDP show. Join me next week as Mr. Jason Abbey makes his triumphant return to the IDP After Show for our Week 8 preview. Until then, for Tripp and myself, we say thank you for joining us tonight. Best of luck to you and your teams in Week 6, and take care.
This was the IDP After Show.